Om Tavakadamradam Taptajivanam Kavivaridinam Kalmashapaham Sharavanamangalam Shrivadataram Bhuvikananti Puriyajana. Your words are like nectar, bringing life to scorched souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome, everyone, to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We are on the chapter Advice to Householders, and the date is Thursday, August 24th, 1882, and we're a couple of pages in. Those who want to follow along in the book, it's page 115. And Sri Ramakrishna is speaking to M, and they're in his room in Dakshineshwar. We saw last time that M had the opportunity to ask several very interesting questions to Sri Ramakrishna. What is the meaning of the realization of God? And now we get the question M. When one sees God, does one see him with these eyes? Now, it's an interesting question. Normally, we would immediately say, of course not. But Sri Ramakrishna had different types of visions. So he himself would say that there were times when I would actually see with these very eyes. What did he say? Chormo Chokku, something like that. That the first vision he had like that, he used to say, was the vision of Sita. And prior to that, he would go into some type of bhava samadhi, some type of ecstatic state, where he's not aware of anything outside of himself, and the mind goes to a different realm. He has a vision of Divine Mother, or whatever he's meditating upon, or whatever type of experience he has. But he said this time his eyes were wide open, and he was near the Panchavati, and he saw the trees and the flowers and the path and everything there, and he saw a woman walking, a very handsome figure, glorious looking. He didn't know who she was, and then he saw a monkey roll on the ground in front of her, and it flashed in his mind, this is Sita. So he said this was the first vision I had of that type, where with eyes wide open. Now, does that mean he actually saw her? Could it be that he's seeing everything else, but still his mind is in an ecstatic state? Would anyone else have seen her? No, we doubt that very much. But anyhow, he had different types of visions. There's an interesting book that was written many years ago by Swami Atmajnanananda. I remember reading it, and he made a list of all of the experiences that Thakur had, breaking them down into those where he was in a state of ecstasy and those where he was actually seeing something with eyes wide open. So we do have that possibility. It's not such an outrageous question that we would immediately say, no, of course not with these eyes, these ordinary eyes. Anyhow, that's the question. When one sees God, does one see him with these eyes? The main thing is that we have no idea what it means to see God. This is as many times as Thakur tells us about his visions and things, it's something we won't really know until we have that experience ourselves. There are some things which are almost inexplicable. How Thakur saw the living baby Rama, and there's the image of Ramlala. There's a very, very small brass image, and he saw it as living and would feed it and bathe it and do everything. So he's seeing the actual figure, but he's not seeing it the way we would see it. So what takes place in the mind of these mystics when it ascends to a high level is very hard to say. Sometimes they're aware of external things, sometimes not. Sometimes they may not even know. If they're seeing something, the mind may go to some other realm and they feel that they're there and seeing it like we ordinarily see things. So it's very hard to say. So anyhow, this will be the answer that Thakur gives. Master, God cannot be seen with these physical eyes. So even if the eyes are wide open and we're seeing, because Swamiji makes the point that this physical eye is not really the organ of vision. That it's something internal. Whether we want to go to the eyeball and to the optic nerve and to the brain and all of that, between the brain and the mind, we don't know how that works also, but there's some internal seeing that takes place through of course the instrument of the eye normally, but Thakur is saying not with these physical eyes. In the course of spiritual discipline, one gets a love body. Prema, the love body. Now, what does this mean? We don't know. Endowed with love eyes, love ears, and so on. One sees God with those love eyes. One hears the voice of God with those love ears. One even gets a sexual organ made of love. At these words, M burst out laughing. A little embarrassed laughter. The master continued unannoyed. With this love body, the soul communes with God. Now, what does it mean? Love body, and love eyes, and love ears. My understanding will be that we're talking about the mind ascending to a different level. The mind experiences the world depending upon the level that it's on. Thakur was very clear about this, that with Kundalini, when it rises to a certain chakra, we'll see the world with the ordinary eyes. We'll see it as something physical. It'll go a little bit higher. We'll see it as light. It'll go a little higher. Everything will disappear. We go a little higher, and there's not even a sense of I. So our understanding of the world and our perception of the world is dependent upon two things. One, the senses. If the senses are functioning correctly, if we have good eyesight, we'll see it in a certain way. Bad eyesight, we'll see it in a different way. So the senses have to be operating correctly, and then depending upon the nature of the senses, we see the world. Swamiji again says if we had a sense of vision that could perceive electrical waves in the space, then we would see a whole different world. Everything would look different. There's so many different types of microwaves and electrical waves and all sorts of things that are going through. We only see the light waves because of the nature of the sense organ of the eye. So this is one thing. The second thing is, where is the mind? If the mind is someplace else, even ordinarily we know that. If we're very intently listening to something, we may not be aware that the eyes are seeing something. But if the mind is not focused on it, it won't register. Maybe it'll register subconsciously, but consciously it won't register. So very often it'll happen. Some people get so involved in reading a book that you can even call out to them and they won't hear you. So the sense is working, but the mind is not connected to it. So we don't have that type of experience. So to me, when Thakur says his love body and with the love ears and eyes and everything, he's really referring to the fact that the mind has to ascend to a higher level, to a higher plane, in order for us to have these different types of mystical or spiritual experiences. So the master continued unannoyed. With this love body, the soul communes with God. M again became serious. Master, but this is not possible without intense love of God. So through deep meditation, the mind can go higher. Through deep love, the mind can go higher also. It's not simply a meditative technique or Kundalini yoga technique or anything. Thakur says even things like kumbhaka, this retention of breath, it doesn't have to be through the practice of pranayama. It can be through the ecstatic love of God. These things will automatically take place. So this is not possible without intense love of God. One sees nothing but God everywhere when one loves Him with great intensity. It is like a person with a jaundice who sees everything yellow. Then one feels, I am verily he. This is a very nice idea. There was a disciple of a holy mother by the name of Rammoy Maharaj. Everyone called him Rammoy Maharaj. He was known as the Rose Swami. He lived in Vrindavan for long. He was one of the young boys who went to Holy Mother when he was very young. But he became well known for growing roses. And he lived to a ripe old age. I met him only one time. But the name is Rammoy. That means seeing everything as Rama himself. Huh? And the gopi said that Radha. She would see Krishna everywhere. Because the mind is sense. It's not that the sense of sight is any different. Same eyeballs that she sees ordinarily. But somehow the mind is so intensely thinking of the object of love, of Krishna in that case, that she sees everywhere. Or the Sita, she'll see Ram everywhere. Rammoy. So Rammoy Dikchi, I'm seeing everything. Rama himself has become everything. So it's a very beautiful idea, this power of love, even ordinary love, that the lover is thinking of the beloved. This is why the worldly love is very often used to help explain this divine love. The love that Radha had for Krishna, on one level, this is love between a man and a woman, or actually a boy and a girl. They were both young at that time. But we all understand that. This is the advantage to these different bhavas, that they all use emotions that we understand. The mother knows what it means to love a child, so she can transfer that type of love to God. So the same thing with this type of love. So even ordinary love, if one is thinking of the beloved day and night, then they see the beloved everywhere somehow, not maybe literally, but because the mind is everything. Thakur says this many times. Everything is a question of the mind. So he gives the example. One sees nothing but God everywhere when one loves him with great intensity. It is like a person with a jaundice who sees everything yellow. Then one feels, I am verily he. The gopis generally would want to feel that Krishna is their beloved. But there were times when even they would get into that mood and be so identified, feel no difference between themselves and Krishna. The devotees of the Divine Mother, generally they'll want to feel I'm a child. But we even have this saham, not soham. I am he, saham, I am she. So this will also be one type of attitude for worshippers of the Divine Mother. A drunkard, deeply intoxicated, says, verily, I am Kali. The gopis, intoxicated with love, exclaimed, verily, I am Krishna. So sometimes they would even go that far. One who thinks of God day and night beholds him everywhere. It is like a man seeing flames on all sides after he has gazed fixedly at one flame for some time. You can do this. It's a nice little experiment. If you look at something very bright and then even close your eyes, you'll see that brightness, or look someplace else, you'll see that brightness. Just a very normal, natural type of thing. But Thakur is saying that if we're thinking of God day and night, then we'll feel that divine presence, we'll see that presence everywhere. But that isn't the real flame flashed through M's mind. So M a little bit misses the point of this whole thing. Of course, Thakur is not trying to equate the flame with God, but he's trying to show this phenomenon, that if the mind is deeply focused on something, that remains fixed in the mind. Sri Ramakrishna, who could read a man's inmost thought, said, one doesn't lose consciousness by thinking of him who is all spirit, all consciousness. Then he mentions Shivanath. He for some reason, he talks about Shivanath a lot. Shivanath was one of the members of the Brahmo Samaj. He became, I don't know if he was an acharya at that time, but later he was one of the speakers, one of the leaders, perhaps after Keshav passed away and everything. And Thakur was very fond of him. Even though this Shivanath, he he would go and he would see Thakur and he would be respectful and everything. And then other times he really prescribed to this idea that Thakur was a little bit nutty. He used the term bayhead. He had lost his head. Why? Too much thinking of God. So he ascribed to that view that Thakur was a little bit mad. They used to call him Pagal Thakur. There's a mad Thakur. Many people thought he's a very good person and very deep love for God. We respect him very much, but a little eccentric, a little bit off, a little mad. So the Shivanath used to say that. So Thakur always would talk about how Shivanath said that. So Shivanath once remarked that too much thinking about God confounds the brain. Bayhead ho jai. One goes off one's head. Thereupon I said to him, how can one become unconscious by thinking of consciousness? Okay, so suppose day and night we're thinking of some worldly thing, then we may start to think that this is something real, or some attachment comes in everything. But if we're thinking of consciousness itself, if the mind is concentrated on the real nature of ultimate reality, then it can only merge in reality. If we're thinking of some false thing or something insubstantial or something that will only lead to attachment, that attachment will grow. So it depends on the nature of the object that we're meditating, of course. Thereupon I said to him, how can one become unconscious by thinking of consciousness? M. Yes, sir, I realize that. It isn't like thinking of an unreal object. How can a man lose his intelligence if he always fixes his mind on him whose very nature is eternal intelligence? Master, with pleasure. It is through God's grace that you have understood that. The doubts of the mind will not disappear without His grace. Doubts do not disappear without self-realization. Now, there are a couple of things here. One is that Sri Ramakrishna, of course, for M's sake, wants him to grasp these very subtle teachings. He sees, the very first time he saw M, he saw that M was a highly sensitive and spiritual soul and had great potential for attaining the heights of God realization. So, of course, he's thrilled that M has grasped a very subtle point. But the second thing is that he knows that M will write these things down. He knows that M is the recorder. We get hints throughout. That's why very often he'll ask him, did you understand that? Can you repeat that? Or if he in some interesting conversation and M isn't there, he'll say, go tell M to come. So for M's sake, but for our sake also, it's very important that M understands this so he can write it down correctly and everything. Now, we get some interesting things here also. Through God's grace that you understand that. The doubts of the mind will not disappear without His grace. Doubts do not disappear without self-realization. Okay, now we have two things here. I won't equate these two statements. The first, what do we mean by God's grace? Whenever we think of God's grace, we have to ask ourselves, what is our conception of God? That God can bestow grace. Is it God up in heaven? Huh? Is it the Divine Mother dwelling in her divine loka sphere or something? Is it Narayana in Vaikuntha? What is our conception of it? Sri Ramakrishna always emphasized the fact that God is within and without, not only within, but it's that divine presence within. That divine presence within is what bestows grace upon us, because that's the access point. He says the lowest, the different types of classes of devotees, the lowest type says God is there. Heta, he points someplace else, or she points someplace else. And then after that, God dwells within the heart, second type. And what's the highest type? God is manifest everywhere. So if we think that this grace he's talking about will be that divine presence within, then we start to understand that Thakur's idea of grace of the mind and grace of God, they start to become one. And so what is the grace of God internally? That means it'll blow away all of the dust. It'll clear out all of the misconceptions. It'll allow the mind to go to a higher realm, to see things more clearly. So this is why Thakur talked about the grace of the mind. There's an expression, maybe a verse from a song, I don't know, from the Vaishnava tradition that Thakur refers to many times, that says, one may have the grace of the devotee, one may have the grace of the guru, one may have the grace of God, but none of these mean anything unless one has the grace of the mind. So the grace of the one, it says eka doya. If one has the grace of that one, then everything is fine. Otherwise, nothing is of any avail. And Guru may give blessings right and left. That everyone else may be well-wishers, but if the mind is not allowing us, if the mind is constantly giving us trouble, we won't have any way to transcend that. So when the mind enters into this higher level, the mind becomes calm and peaceful and clear, and we can understand subtle things. This is the grace of the mind, but it's also the grace of God. I take it that way. People have different ways of understanding this, of course. This idea of grace is a very mysterious thing. But this is a way we can understand it that appeals to our logic and our experience also. Sometimes we'll have moments of clarity. And it's not because we don't want it all the time. We're always trying to have moments of clarity. We sit for meditation day after day after day. The mind is cluttered, running after this and that. One day, for some reason, it becomes quiet. Is it not that we wanted it to be quiet at other times? It just happens. We don't feel that we did anything different to make it become quiet that time. So we say grace. Yeah? So we feel we experience some grace. And it allows that divine presence to shine through. So we feel it as grace also. Now, this can remove doubts with regard to the ability to clearly understand something. But real doubt, ultimately, can only be removed with God realization. We have the verse that we always refer to, that these knots of the heart will become untied, the doubts will be removed, all of our karma will be exhausted when we have that ultimate realization. Tasmin drishte paravari. When we realize that that Supreme Brahman that manifests as the immanent and transcendent, for everything from the subtlest to the most visible thing, when we have that realization, only then will these doubts completely vanish. Before that, we can develop tremendous conviction that, yes, now I see that I had a misconception before. Now I don't doubt what your words are telling me. I have no doubt about that. This is what's known as vishwasa. This is, Thakur talked about this vishwas, to have this conviction, the deep conviction of the truth of something. It doesn't mean we've realized it, but it means we can't question it anymore. It's very close to realization. Or Swami Atmajnanananda used to say that conviction itself is a type of realization. And almost the final rung of the ladder that takes us to that realization. So we have two things. One, doubts of the mind will not disappear without His grace. So I'll take that as the grace of the mind. And they do not disappear without self-realization. So the very highest, that means they're really gone, that they'll never come back again. So because he's not telling M that, oh, you got self-realization. He's not telling him that. But he's saying it's by God's grace, and now you understand that doubt is removed. But when one has this final realization, then there's no room for doubt, because one has had the experience. Then it's not a question, I have the conviction that it's true, I know that it's true. Very subtle difference between conviction and knowledge. One is still through the mind, that we have that conviction because it makes perfect sense. We've seen people who have realized it. It meets all of the pramanas, all the tests that we can give for it, except that one that I haven't had the direct experience. When we have the direct experience, then there's no room for any doubt. So the Master continues, Sri Ramakrishna continues, but One need not fear anything if one has received the grace of God. It is rather easy for a child to stumble if he holds his father's hand, but there can be no such fear if the father holds the child's hand. Now, this is also a nice way of understanding Sharanagati. And Thakur also gives a very similar illustration, comparing and contrasting the baby monkey and the mother monkey and the baby kitten and the mother cat. If you've ever been to the zoo and you go to see the monkeys and the apes and gorillas and everything, you'll see that mother will be jumping around from place to place and the babies will be underneath holding on. There may be 5 or 6 of them. They hold on for dear life. If they let go, they'll fall. Mother's not even holding them. The baby kitten doesn't even have the power to do that. The baby kitten can only go mew, 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 can only call mother, 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 and the mother comes and the mother herself takes it. She'll open her mouth and she'll grab it by the scruff of the neck and she'll do it gently so it doesn't hurt the kitten, and she'll take it and she'll put it someplace and the kitten is content. So this is that Sharanagati that is also a type of grace. We can understand grace in so many ways. It doesn't have to be a very traditional idea that God is going to stick his finger out and light will come down and it'll strike us and we'll fall and we'll have some God realization. It doesn't have to be like that. We can understand it, that we're in a state of grace when we have perfect reliance and surrender to God. This is also a type of grace. Yeah? We're living in a state of grace. Doesn't mean that we've had the highest realization yet. So this grace has 2 levels, 2 aspects to it. That grace which allows us to find a spiritual path, find a guru. That grace which allows us to do spiritual practice, which allows us to have holy company. This is all grace. That Shankaracharya, he mentions 3 different types. That there's human birth. This is also grace. That longing for God realization. This is grace. Finding a highly realized soul who will take our responsibility. This is also grace. This is all the preliminary grace. Final grace is that God realization. Thakur gives another nice story, very beautiful story, that there was a king in a certain area. He had a small kingdom, and most of the people there were relatively poor. And one day he said to his minister, I'd like to visit one of the homes of one of the citizens in my kingdom. Can you arrange for it? So the minister, he said, okay, but give me a little time. So he goes and he finds a family, and he says to them, your house is a little bit shabby, that it could use a little furniture, a little cleaning up. Let us do all of this, and you're going to get a nice visitor to come. We have a nice tea set for you, and we can get you a good quality tea and get everything ready, some nice snacks and all of that. So the minister arranges for all of these things. So he cleans out the house, gets all of the things necessary, and then he says, now let me bring the guest, and the king comes. So the first grace, the beginning part is also grace. The grace is that we hear that something wonderful can happen. We hear that God can enter into the heart. This is number 1. Number 2, that the grace will come with this purification of the heart. Then all of the things that are added to us, the love and devotion and discrimination and dispassion, the mumukshutva, all of these things, desire for liberation, all of these things come. This will be like the tea set and the furniture and the table and the chair and all of those things. So this is the first type of grace. But the ultimate grace, final grace, is when the king himself comes. When God enters into the heart, we have that final type of realization. So Thakur is talking about these 2 different levels. One, when we're holding on and clinging. And we have to do that in the beginning. There's no question about that. But then we reach this higher level where we say, even that I can't do. You have to come and help me. This is Sharanagati. And we simply say, I take refuge, that now everything is in your hands, Mother. This is the attitude of the kitten. So they're both good and they're both important. Attitude of the kitten is higher. This is what Thakur is saying. A man does not have to suffer anymore if God in His grace removes his doubts and reveals Himself to him. But this grace descends upon him only after he has prayed to God with intense yearning of heart and practiced spiritual discipline. Okay, these are the two things. One, we have to do something. Thakur said it over and over and over again, that it's not enough to simply sit there and say, oh, do something for me, God, help me, this and that. We ourselves have to do something. What is that? We have to do our spiritual practice. So this is one thing. We have to be regular in our spiritual practice, do our meditation, our japa, our prayer, our puja, whatever it is that we do, our bhajans, whatever it is that we do. It doesn't matter. We have to do it very regularly with great devotion, but at the same time, we have to have this tremendous longing for God realization. If we do it without that, then it becomes a little bit mechanical. Huh? It becomes a little mechanical. It's not bad. It's better than not doing it at all. We don't always feel that tremendous yearning for God. Those days when we don't feel it, we do our practice anyhow. We can't give up. But he says that grace descends upon him only after he's prayed to God with intense yearning of heart. Of all the spiritual disciplines, meditation, japa, puja, all of that, Thakur emphasizes prayer to a great extent. Because in prayer, we don't have to follow any rules or guidelines or worry about, are we reciting mantras properly, are we doing ritual properly? We don't have to worry about any of that. It comes straight from the heart, straight from the depths of the heart. And we can express ourselves in any way we want to. And it has a tremendous power. And we can do it with full concentration. We try to sit for meditation, and concentration, it just goes all over the place. But we turn to prayer, where we're actually uttering, not out loud, but uttering to ourselves a word, putting into words. There's tremendous longing of the heart. And the mind is fully engaged in that. So this is what Thakur is saying, that grace descends only after one has prayed to God with intense yearning of heart and practiced spiritual discipline. Both are necessary. The mother feels compassion for her child when she sees him running about breathlessly. She has been hiding herself, now she appears before the child. This was another point that Thakur made. And again, we don't have to take these things literally. We have to look at the deeper meaning behind all of these things. And that is that this grace won't come as long as we're perfectly happy with worldly pleasures and enjoyments. We're perfectly happy having good things and bad things, going through this whole cycle of smiles and tears, huh? Going back and forth that way. We're perfectly happy. Then, not that Divine Mother is looking down somewhere and saying, my child is happy. This is the imagery that we have. There may be some truth to it. I don't know all of these things, but we can understand it the other way, that the mind itself is content. Mind itself is content to let this lower mind have these enjoyments. When the mind itself gets bored with these things and wants something higher and calls for the Divine Mother, then that awakens something within the heart. So these are two ways of understanding all of these things. One is a little bit for the philosopher, who something that appeals to our understanding. The other is for those who don't need philosophy. They're better off. I have the conviction they're better off, and none of this is meant to make anybody question. Anybody has this belief, no, the Divine Mother is there. She answers my prayer. I know it. Then they're fortunate people. So those people don't listen to all of my rationalizing and philosophy. Okay. But why should God make us run about? Thought M. Now M is having a conversation with Sri Ramakrishna, where he's asking all of these questions to himself. as if he's saying them out loud, and as if Thakur is hearing them, but somehow Thakur knows what M is thinking. So immediately Sri Ramakrishna said, and M had that deep conviction that Thakur could read his mind, could hear his thoughts. And whether Thakur actually heard the thought or intuitively knew what he was thinking, it's true that Thakur had that ability. We don't know how or why, but he was very specific about it. You know, we have these display cabinets. You can keep plates and dishes and nice crystals and things inside, and it'll be glass and you can look inside. He used to say, I can see inside a person's heart and mind and know exactly what's inside, their past and their future and their samskaras and all of these things, the same way that people can see what's inside one of these display cabinets, these crystal cabinets and things. So, M thought, but why should God make us run about? Immediately Sri Ramakrishna said, it is His will. Now, this is a problem with English, the English translation, because, you know, in Bengali, they use the same word for he and she. She. And, or tini, if you want to use the very formal. So when we translate, it's up to the translator. And in the West, people are so used to using he for God. In Thakur's mind, I would say she is better. And because he's talking about the Divine Mother. So this is, you can say he/she. This is just inherent difficulty in translating Bengali into English. It would be nice if we had these neutral types of words that didn't make us always say he or she and try to come up with new pronouns and things that are not considered sexist and everything. So let me change this a little bit. It is her will, the mother's will, that we should run about a little. Then it is great fun. God has created the world in play, as it were. So, as it were. So we don't have to take this, again, literally. It seems like a play to us. That we're running around, we're all playing a role. Even the mother's playing the role of the mother, father the father. The monk is playing the role of a monk. Yeah? And we can even say that God himself playing all of these roles. That was Thakur's vision. I see it Rama himself, who is disguised and dressed as all men. Sita, disguised and dressed as all women. So we can say it is his will, her will, mother's will, that we should run about a little. Then it is great fun. God has created the world in play, as it were. This is called Mahamaya, the great illusion of Mahamaya. One of the reasons why we have this conception of the Divine Mother is to take this concept of Maya and personalize it and let it become part and parcel of this ultimate reality. Otherwise, the philosophical conception of Maya, we don't know where to place it and we don't know what status to give it. It can't be outside of Brahman because Brahman alone exists. It can't be within Brahman because Brahman has no room for any darkness or illusion or anything. It can't be ultimately real. Then it's the second thing. It can't be ultimately unreal because then we won't see the effects of Maya. So it's neither real nor unreal, neither within Brahman nor without. We don't really know what to do with it. So the devotee will say, why are you making such a fuss out of all of this? This is a divine power. And this divine power involves this veiling, this avarana Shakti. Is one of the powers of Maya that once we're within this dream, Brahman itself playing all of these roles, and Brahman itself falls under the veil. Brahman itself forgets. We have that expression Thakur liked, this Pancho Bhuter Fade, Brahma Pade Kande, that Brahman himself gets caught in the snare of the five elements and weeps. Thakur uses this to explain, on the one hand, the avatar, why the avatar behaves like an ordinary human being. But the same Brahman is playing the role of each and every one of us and forgets. So this forgetting, this not realizing our divine nature, this is part of this play, why we call it a play. That we all have a role to play and our parts to play, and we forget that we're actors. We identify with the role so much. So this is part of the scheme of things. This is why we can say this is a divine plan. We don't know why it is this way. Could it have been some other way? It's very difficult to say. But this seems to be the way that it is. And why not accept this? If this is the way the world is, why not accept this as the divine plan? Either that, or we're just there's no plan. Everything is just random, cause and effect. We can believe that. I mean, there are plenty of people who believe that. We can even believe that and lead a spiritual type of life. But what this is saying is that this Brahman that we conceive of, we have to conceive of it as having some type of power. Otherwise, we can't explain anything. Or we have to say that, okay, Brahman is here and the universe is here. So Purusha Prakriti, we can be like that if we want, with this Sankhya ideal. But then we won't be Advaitins exactly, and we won't be able to explain the existence of so-called matter. So this is a very beautiful way of taking this philosophical idea of false identification and ignorance and everything, and saying that the spell of the Divine Mother that is making us play these games and participate in this lila without really understanding who we are and getting too identified with that role itself. So, Sri Ramakrishna speaking, it is Mother's will that we should run about a little, then it is great fun. God has created the world in play, as it were. This is called Mahamaya, the great illusion. Therefore, one must take refuge in the Divine Mother, the cosmic power itself. So the divine, when Thakur says the Divine Mother, he's talking about Shakti as inhering in Brahman. He doesn't have this concept of Brahman and Shakti as two separate things. He says that they're abheda. They're indistinguishable. They belong to each other, two sides of the same coin. Just as we can't imagine burning power without fire and fire without burning power, or milk and its whiteness. He gives many different types of examples. That it's inconceivable that we have one without the other. There can't be the power of Brahman. If we worship Shakti just as power, the power has to inhere in something. There has to be something powerful if there's power. So automatically we're combining them. So this is why Thakur used to say to Narendra, that which you call Brahman, I call Kali. So it's not Shiva and Shakti, it's not Brahman and the power, Brahman and Shakti or Brahman and Kali, anything like that. It's Brahman alone. But when this power is manifest, Thakur says, then I think of it in terms of Kali. So we can say Saguna Brahman, Nirguna Brahman belong to the same reality, one and the same. Thakur used to use that language also. Therefore, one must take refuge in the Divine Mother, the cosmic power itself. It is she who has bound us with the shackles of illusion. The realization of God is possible only when those shackles are severed. So, praying to the Divine Mother means praying that this false understanding of things will disappear, that the divine presence will shine forth, will manifest. Now it's being hidden. That sun of knowledge is always there and always present. A little cloud comes to the sky. Very small, wispy cloud is enough to hide the sun completely. So we do our best to get rid of it, but as long as we're trying, that sense of I is there. So when we can get rid of that and say, Mother, you have to do it yourself, I take refuge in you, then the ego vanishes. The vanishing of the ego and the disappearance of the cloud are the same thing. Huh? So automatically that grace comes. The Master continued, one must propitiate the Divine Mother, the primal energy, in order to obtain God's grace. So this really, the concept of Brahman doesn't really allow us to develop a devotional relationship and to pray. The Brahman is impersonal, absolute reality. When we talk about the Divine Mother, then we're talking about this Brahman. We're putting a face. We're putting emotions there. We're adding this element of love there. That love which we have within our hearts, we're projecting on this Divine Mother, but the love that we have in our hearts comes from the Divine Mother. It is the presence of the Divine Mother. It is the ananda aspect of reality within the heart. So we're superimposing something which was given to us already. This is that interesting idea we get from the Isha Upanishad, huh? That everything is to be covered by God. We're superimposing this idea of God on everything in order to realize that everything is already infused with God, everything is already the manifestation of God. But psychologically we have to do that. So this is what we're doing. We may feel that, yes, I'm imagining all of these divine qualities on the Divine Mother, but I do that in order to realize that she's the source of all of these things. Whatever love I feel in my heart, whatever compassion I have, this can't be there without the presence of the divine, the divine consciousness within. So one must propitiate the Divine Mother, the primal energy, in order to obtain God's grace. God himself is Mahamaya, who deludes the world with her illusion and conjures up the magic of creation, preservation, and destruction. She has spread this veil of ignorance before our eyes. We can go into the inner chamber only when she lets us pass through the door. The one conception of Maya, Thakur gives many different definitions. Sometimes he says Maya is the ego itself is Maya. So when he says Maya, that she's standing before the door, she has to step aside. That means we can't enter into anything higher as long as this ego is there. Thakur says it's like the stump of a tree that grows up in front of the door of a small house. You can't open the door as long as that tree trunk is there. It has to be cut down to the very ground level, and then you can open the door. So this ego is like that. And by praying to the Divine Mother, this is how we get rid of it. The whole mind gets fixed on Mother, we forget about ourselves. I'm simply a child, I'm helpless, I can't do anything. So we're saying this I, we're converting it into this ripe I, in Thakur's language. So we can go into the inner chamber only when she lets us pass through the door. That means she steps aside. We have to reach this state of grace for the mind, when this ego is not standing in the way and clouding everything and covering everything. Living outside, we see only outer objects, but not that eternal being. Existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute. That means the outgoing senses. That we see everything external to us and we identify it and we see everything is real. Therefore, it is stated in the Purana that deities like Brahma praised Mahamaya for the destruction of the demons Madhu and Kaitava. Shakti alone is the root of the universe. So we have this doctrine called Shakti Parinamavada. That Brahman, it's not exactly Brahman that has become this universe, because Brahman can't become anything, and Brahman is perfectly transcendent in everything. It's the Shakti aspect of Brahman. The Shakti aspect of Brahman that can become this universe, and in different ways we understand that. So this Chit Shakti, through this projection of this cosmic mind. In the Upanishads, we're reading now Kumar, and I'm reading from Brihadaranyaka or Chandogya Upanishad. Same section we find in Taittiriya Upanishad, that Brahman is sitting and Brahman looks around. Aikshita. Brahman looks around and it doesn't say anything, but we get the impression that Brahman looks around and doesn't see anything and maybe feels lonely. So Brahman says, Bahusyam, may I become many. And through that thought, may I become many. Prajaya, may I take birth, may I be born. Then does this whole universe come to existence at once, like in a dream? This is one theory, a very nice theory. But in the Upanishad, maybe it's strictly allegorical, but we get the building blocks. We get the elements that come. We get fire and earth and water, that these come one after one, and each one comes and it looks around and says, may I be many, and then that also manifests. And so it's more or less a material or real in some sense universe, but it's all coming out of the thought of Brahman, or Brahma, we can say, because Brahman itself, it won't even be able to think or look or anything like that. That means the Shakti aspect. This Chit Shakti, there's a power of thought. To think something, Satya Sankalpa, to think something turns it into something real. This type of idea. So Shakti alone is the root of the universe. Shakti not is separate from Brahman, as part and parcel of Brahman. That primal energy has two aspects, vidya and avidya. Okay, knowledge and ignorance. And this will manifest more for us in our own personal lives. We can take it as a metaphysical doctrine also, but it has very great application to us in our daily lives, that we'll see that some things, avidya maya and vidya maya, both mean maya. Maya will mean something that belongs to this relative universe, something that's not absolutely real, it's not Brahman. It's relatively real. It belongs to the relative universe. Some things keep us bound to the world, and some things take us higher. So we have to distinguish which is this avidya maya and which is vidya maya. Sometimes it can be the same thing. Thakur talks about someone is married, and husband or the wife, one of them either will be a great help in the spiritual life of the partner, or will drag down the partner. Whether husband or wife, doesn't matter. So one he'll call as avidya maya and the other avidya maya. So and now he's saying that this avidya deludes. Avidya conjures up lust and gold, which casts the spell. Vidya begets devotion, kindness, wisdom, and love, which lead one to God. They look the same very often because they may come in as a desire. So people used to ask Thakur, he would say that desire binds the soul, that we have to be free from desire and everything. And they would say, what about the desire for God? That's also a desire. So he would say, it's technically it's also a desire, but there's a big distinction. And the distinction is that all of the other desires bind us to the world, and they inhibit our spiritual development. The desire for God helps us. So it may be a desire, but we shouldn't even call it a desire. This belongs to vidya maya. This is something that will be helpful to us and will eliminate all of the other desires. He gives so many illustrations. He talks about ordinary sugar that has so many negative things to it, and there's michri, a very refined type of sugar. And he talks about these greens. Some of them, they create bile, the hinche shak, he says, but this other type, not only doesn't it create bile, it eliminates bile. That's very important. So the thought of desire for God, it's not that we can say, well, it doesn't harm us in any way. It eliminates all the other desires. So he said it shouldn't be classified as a desire. So the vidya maya and avidya maya, they may look externally similar in different ways.
Mother is on the phone. You want to talk, or shall I ask her to call later?
I'll call her back in about 15 minutes, 10 minutes, yeah. So he says that vidya, or vidya maya, begets devotion, kindness, wisdom, and love, which lead one to God. So there are also emotions. We have different types, even passions. This is why they look so similar. Thakur says the same passion, which can be avidya maya, can be twisted and turned in a new direction so that it becomes vidya maya, so that it becomes helpful. So that same longing for sense enjoyment, if we turn that around and have that longing for God enjoyment, then we've changed it from something harmful to something helpful. And this longing for God will eliminate longing for the world. So this is the second quality that he has. This avidya must be propitiated, and that is the purpose of the rite of Shakti worship. So we have to pray, don't bind me with these things. That I have this sense of the ego, I have this pride, I have a tendency to anger, lust, greed, all of these different things. Don't tempt me with these things. Step aside. This ego that I have, I know that this belongs to Maya. Step aside. Let this ego, let it be transformed into the child ego. Let it be transformed into this vidya Maya ego. So we pray to the Divine Mother, don't tempt me with this avidya aspect of yours. Open the gate, step aside. She has to step aside. You know, Thakur's example, are we going to get it here? We'll get it someplace later. That Rama, Sita, and Lakshman are all walking together in a row. And Lakshman he loves to see Rama all of the time. But Sita's in between. So he says, oh, my dear sister-in-law Sita, please, can you step aside so I can see Rama? So she said, gladly, I'll step aside. So we pray to Maya, please step aside in this, Maya in the aspect of ignorance, in the aspect of ego, in the aspect of bondage and obstacles. Please step aside. Because that's all we have to do. Well, all we have to do is get the cloud to move. Sun is always shining. Rama is there. So we pray. This is why he says, why did he say avidya has to be propitiated? Why not just say Maya in both aspects? But particularly in this aspect, deluding aspect. Please don't delude me anymore. That is the purpose of the rites of Shakti worship. The devotee assumes various attitudes toward Shakti in order to propitiate her. See, generally when we talk about these different attitude bhavas, we have these 5 bhavas, they belong to the Vaishnava tradition. We find a similar thing with those who worship the Divine Mother in the Shakti tradition. There are 3 different attitudes. So Thakur says, the attitude of a handmaid, so Sakhi Bhava, so a hero, Veer Bhava, or a child. So these are the 3 different attitudes that Thakur, like this, he used to call Shantan Bhav. There's the attitude of a child. He looked upon the Divine Mother as his very own mother. And he was a small, helpless child who knows nothing but the mother. We think about the small child, if the child gets separated from the mother, how the child screams and weeps and everything, the tremendous longing to be with the mother. So that attitude, Thakur says, arop korte hobe. You have to assume that attitude. You have to adopt that attitude. So we have, and then the handmaid. And this will be thinking of oneself, just as Radha had the other gopis, so the Divine Mother also has her attendants that will come and dress her and fan her and do all of those things. And this Veer Bhava, this heroic mood, this will be something similar to Madhur Bhava, kind of a husband-wife relationship. A hero's attitude is to please her, even as a man pleases a woman through intercourse. This is something that Thakur didn't encourage anybody to do and himself couldn't do. When we hear that he practiced all of the tantric rituals, it says 64 different things. Nobody's very clear what these 64 different tantras are. It's a little bit mysterious. But anyhow, there are many things that Thakur didn't do, couldn't do, and didn't have to do. To give one example, one of the rituals involves, or maybe several, involves drinking wine, consecrated wine, which is called karan. And this word karan, karana in Sanskrit, also means cause. So Thakur used to say, that because the Brahmani, by the way, Brahmani was the one who tried to get him to do all of these different tantric practices. That she wanted him to bring the wine, she brought it, but as soon as she said, here's the karan, then he said, my mind thought of the divine cause of the universe and went up and merged in samadhi. So then, no need to do it. So he didn't have to do it. So that way he got out of all of these things, especially involving women and sexual things and everything. He didn't do any of that and didn't encourage anyone to do that. So he said, the worship of Shakti is extremely difficult. It is no joke. I passed 2 years as the handmaid and companion of the Divine Mother. This was when Thakur lived in the home of Mathur Babu and his wife, in Jan Bazar, I think. And he would dress like a woman. He became so intimate with all of the women of the family, they considered him one of their very own. He would put ornaments on the deity. He would fan the deity and everything. So he stayed in that attitude, just as he would adopt different attitudes. When he worshipped Rama, he felt that he was Hanuman. After all of them, he went back to the child of the Divine Mother. So this isn't something that was necessarily natural for him, but he made it natural, so he could do these things. So he said, I passed 2 years as the handmaid and companion of the Divine Mother, but my natural attitude has always been that of a child towards its mother. I regard the breasts of any woman as those of my own mother. If the Thakur used to say the different ways, of course these are all directed to men. This is when women read it, they have to just in their mind flip a switch and understand if he's speaking to women, he'll say similar things in other ways. But if a monk looks upon every woman and tries to feel that this is my very own mother, or even sometimes I think that, oh, in my past lifetime this was my mother, then how can one have any lustful attitude that way? Anyhow, this was one of his ideas. Then he says, women are, all of them, the veritable image of Shakti. In northwest India, the bride holds a knife in her hand at the time of marriage. In Bengal, a nut cutter. The meaning is that the bridegroom, with the help of the bride, who is the embodiment of the divine power. Now he's showing us that his real attitude is that we should look upon all women as special manifestation of the Divine Mother. Who is the embodiment of divine power, will sever the bondage of illusion. This is the heroic attitude. I never worshiped the Divine Mother that way. My attitude toward her is that of a child towards his mother. He used to say it's a very pure attitude, because a child has perfect innocence also. Then he says, the bride is the very embodiment of Shakti. Haven't you noticed at the marriage ceremony how the groom sits behind like an idiot? But the bride, she is so bold. After attaining God, one forgets his external splendor, the glories of his creation. One doesn't think of God's glories after one has seen him. Thakur always says, the higher we go in spiritual life, the more intimate the relationship, and the less the aishwarya, the power aspect is there, and the more the loving aspect comes. The devotee, once immersed in God's bliss, doesn't calculate any more about outer things. When I see Narendra, I don't need to ask him, what's your name, where do you live? Where's the time for such questions? Once a man asked Hanuman which day of the fortnight it was. Brother, said Hanuman, I don't know anything of the day of the week, or the fortnight, or the position of the stars. I think of Rama alone. Okay, this is the end of that day. And we'll begin next time, page 117, October 16th, 1882. And we will close with our chant. Om Niranjanam Nityamananda Rupam Bhaktanukham Bhatha Vikraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamedhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namamaha. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, and who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. I thank all of you for attending. Hope you all have a good week, and everyone please stay well.